The Colicoids were some of the most feared inventors the Star Wars galaxy had to offer. These cannibalistic insectoids were infamous for their droidekas, which were known across the galaxy as some of the deadliest battle droids on the market. But the droidekas weren't the only product of the Colicoid creation nest, and many of their other designs were infamous in their own right. Some of the most fearsome were the Tri-Fighter, one of the most effective space superiority fighters ever made, the Buzz Droid, a nuisance for Republic starfighter pilots, and the Skopanek Annihilator droid recently seen in the Book of Boba Fett. But the Colicoid's greatest invention was much more obscure. The Protodeka, a monstrously powerful hover tank. In this video, we'll be discussing this rare Separatist behemoth in detail.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
To truly appreciate the Protodeka, we need to do a quick refresher about its designers, the Colicoids. The Colicoids were insectoids, and their bodies somewhat resembled their iconic droidekas, which were built in their image. They were tough and exceptionally brutal, with a propensity for violence despite their relative lack of emotion. Colicoids tended to be ruthless, efficient, cunning, and greedy, and as such, they made excellent business beings. But the Colicoids were perhaps most known for their ravenous hunger, which drove them to devour other sentient beings and even each other. These violent carnivores had no qualms with cannibalism, and they had a habit of eating off-worlders foolish enough to land on their homeworld, Coli 4. Their propensity toward cannibalism may have been the cause of their seeming viciousness and lack of empathy. Whether or not this was the case, the Colicoids were certainly dangerous. But Colicoids were also innately curious and intensely creative, with many of them excelling at mechanical work, science, and especially droid design. Their society was extremely advanced, and despite their tendency to eat negotiators sent to their homeworld, the Colicoids had strong trade relationships with many outside organizations, most notably the Trade Federation, to whom they sold droids. The Colicoids weren't a true hive species, but they had queens, and their society was governed by nests. One of these was the Colicoid creation nest, which designed the planet's famous droidekas. In the years before the Clone Wars, most of the Colicoid creation nest's products were manufactured on Coli 4, but after the Colicoids joined the Confederacy of Independent Systems, the Colicoid creation nest began providing droid designs to its Separatist allies to be produced on mech worlds like Geonosis and Hypori. Such was the case with the Colicoid creation we'll be discussing today, the Protodeka, which was designed by the Colicoid creation nest, but produced by the Geonosian Industries shortly before the Clone Wars. The designer of the Protodeka was one of the Colicoid's most gifted engineers, but he apparently had a reputation as a bit of a mad scientist. That checks out. It would take a madman to design this thing, even by Colicoid standards. The other Colicoids believed this engineer was dangerous, and a few months into the Clone Wars, they actually exiled him from Coli 4 despite the success of his Protodekas, imprisoning him in the fortress of Axion, a corporate fortress in the Colicoids' recently purchased colony of Axion. The Protodeka was technically a repulsor-lift tank, an absolutely gargantuan one. We don't have exact numbers for its size, but it made ATTEs look small, and it was closer to the size of a stock freighter or transport ship than a tank. Despite its vast size, it was mobile, and while it wasn't very fast, it was more maneuverable than an ATTE and able to turn pretty rapidly and fly forwards at an appreciable speed. Its design is hard to describe. The Protodeka's core section was blocky and built atop a flat, vaguely octagonal platform, while two wings jutted out from the top of the main body at an angle. The Protodeka's core contained its onboard reactor and built-in droid brain. Did we mention that this whole thing was one enormous droid? And its lower platform was packed full of repulsor lift and propulsion systems, keeping the Protodeka stable and mobile. The Protodeka was extremely heavily armored, able to stand up to fire from an ATTE's mass driver cannon. It took a barrage of dedicated artillery to bring one of these behemoths down, and this was still easier said than done, as the Protodeka had enough firepower to lay waste to an entire column of ATTEs in a matter of seconds. In practice, only Jedi flying agile Republic fighter tanks stood a chance against the Protodeka, as they could outmaneuver it while peppering it with fire. However, this took a long time, and it often required more ammunition than was available. Its thick layers of armor allowed the Protodeka to just smash clean through enemy fortifications. Indeed, this was an intended part of its design, as the Protodeka was intended to be a siege weapon. More specifically, the Protodeka was meant to end sieges, as it was capable of plowing through Durasteel walls. On top of that, this monster was armed to the teeth. Its primary weapons were a pair of forward-mounted, rapid-firing turbo laser cannons that could spray pure explosive death all over a battlefield. These guns melted ATTEs in just a few shots, and they could probably rip through the shields of grounded capital ships. They weren't the Protodeka's only weapons either. The Protodeka's wings were actually missile launchers stocked with dozens of aspect-seeking concussion missiles, which the Protodeka could spray off in volleys to erase entire armored divisions. The Protodeka's final weapon was its most exotic, a seismic wave emitter. This was mounted on the bow of the Protodeka, and its function was quite simple. Whenever enemy vehicles or infantry got too close to a Protodeka, it could fire this thing and send them all flying back. This probably pulverized enemy infantry immediately, turning clone troopers into crushed plastoid and reddish goop, and it disabled the shields of armored vehicles, rendering them vulnerable to the Protodeka's other weapons. This seismic wave emitter probably played a role in the Protodeka's ability to plow through everything in its path. It would be easier to punch through a wall when you've got an earthquake gun, after all. In case you couldn't tell by now, the Protodeka was an absolute juggernaut, and when it made appearances on the battlefields of the Clone Wars, it posed a massive threat to Republic forces. Not even the most entrenched Republic positions could withstand an assault from a Protodeka, and the Republic was lucky that it was the one besieging Separatist positions for most of the war, and not the other way around. Fortunately for the Republic, Protodekas were enormously expensive and were overkill for most battlefield scenarios, and as a result, they were pretty rare, only making a scattering of confirmed appearances in the early months of the war. The most important of these came during the Dark Reaper crisis, Count Dooku's campaign to rebuild an ancient Sith superweapon. When Dooku's forces descended on Raxus Prime to search for the Force Harvester, the core of the Dark Reaper, the Count brought a Protodeka with him, which he unleashed on Republic forces as a parting gift while he fled the planet with the Harvester. The Protodeka obliterated the invasion force the Republic had deployed on Raxus Prime, taking out 2 ATTEs, an ATXT, and 2 Republic fighter tanks within roughly 20 seconds of its deployment. The behemoth was ultimately brought down by Obi-Wan Kenobi, however, who used the junk of Raxus Prime's scrapyards as cover while he fired on the Protodeka with his fighter tank. At the end of the Dark Reaper crisis, more Protodekas were deployed in the Battle of Thule. As Republic and Separatist forces clashed over the ancient city of Kesiak, where Dooku had reassembled the Dark Reaper, 2 Protodekas were deployed at the gates of the city, where they bombarded any Republic units that got too close. However, these Protodekas were also destroyed thanks to the combined efforts of Mace Windu and Luminara Unduli, who led squadrons of fighter tanks in engaging these monsters. With the Protodekas destroyed, Republic forces were ultimately able to take Kesiak, destroy the Dark Reaper, and win the Battle of Thule. It was after, and perhaps because of, this defeat that the Protodeka's designer was imprisoned on the fortress of Axion. His creations continued to see use, however, and as a result, the Republic tried to take Axion 3 months into the Clone Wars, hoping to capture the Colicoid engineer and learn of any weaknesses the Protodeka might have had. The Republic force sent to Axion was massacred, however, leaving only a single clone trooper, Commander Brolus, alive. Brolus was rescued from Axion by Master Yoda, but the mission ended in failure, and the Protodeka continued to be a thorn in the Republic's side. So that's our look at the Protodeka, one of the coolest and most terrifying war machines in the history of the Star Wars galaxy. But what do you think? Are there other obscure vehicles you'd like us to take a look at? Let us know all that and more in the comment section below, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.